General, we've talked a lot about your law career, and I want to return to that and ask you. You've told us about the criminal cases, being a public defender as a young lawyer. You've told us about the creation of the legal clinic that was the forerunner of legal services. But tell us about your practice and what it's primarily been spent on over the years, and what you've become known for as a lawyer.
Well, you never know what you're going to be known for, but one of the things I've enjoyed most about my law practice is trying lawsuits. I got a lot of experience looking at juries as a public defender and in the federal courts, but through public defender work. But in my private practice, through working with John Thomason and Frank Crawford and others in the law firm, I got involved in a lot of very interesting cases. And I guess if anything is especially, my specialty was in professional liability work. So I ended up representing a lot of physicians, dentists, engineers, and architects, and then a few other professionals along the way, such as accountants and even a minister. But most of it was in the medical malpractice field, and so I had the opportunity to work with a lot of Memphis doctors and try a number of medical malpractice cases. And also worked with a number of Memphis engineers and architects in trying a lot of construction lawsuits, all of which I have various things which are interesting, but all of that, each case gave you the opportunity to learn a little bit something about their particular profession, or about the body in the medical cases, about construction and engineering and architectural cases.
You've also been involved in some pretty high-profile criminal cases, including one several years ago where a United States congressman was indicted for bank fraud, and some other Memphis businessmen were also indicted, and you were one of the defense lawyers in that case.
That was a really interesting case, and I represented a Memphis lawyer who was involved in that case, along with Congressman Ford. We tried it twice. We tried the first time was before Judge Odell Horton in Memphis, and it was about probably a 3 or 4 week trial, and it ended up being a hung jury. There was so much controversy that came out of it that the second time we tried it, Judge Horton had died in the meantime, and Judge Jerry Turner took over as a trial judge. And Judge Turner granted the government's motion, and so we moved the jury selection to Jackson, Tennessee, and spent 2 weeks in Jackson selecting a jury. And it turned out to be an all-white jury that was brought back to Memphis to try Congressman Ford, and turned out to be 2 other defendants that were still in the case, one of which was the one I represented. So we worked with some Washington lawyers that represented Congressman Ford. It was a pretty contentious lawsuit. It took about another 3 weeks to try the lawsuit, and at the end, that jury, interestingly enough, found in favor of all of the defendants, and came back with a not guilty verdict.
Lawyers don't seem to be trying as many jury trials as they used to. You still trying jury trials?
Occasionally, I think, and you're right, and they haven't, and it's been recognized on almost every line or level that we're not trying as many cases. There are so many cases that are now resolved by mediation or arbitration, and are taken out of the courts. It's gotten to the point that some legal organizations are even having basically mock trials so that they can train young lawyers on how to try a lawsuit. It's been an interesting situation. I became early on a great believer in the jury system. I felt like that if you had a good opportunity to select a jury, or deselect a jury, as some say, and you had a good trial judge that could keep the rules of the road in place and could give good instruction to a jury, that you generally were going to come out with the correct verdict. And so I have favored jury trials. I think they are a good way to resolve disputes. Mediation has taken a lot of those cases away from the courts. And I don't guess I'm in a position to say that's a bad thing, because I think disputes need to be resolved within the rule of law, and if they do get resolved and people are satisfied with the results, that's fine. But I think the ultimate resolution that we've looked to in this country since 1787 has been the jury trial, and I think that lawyers need to continue to train to be good lawyers, to be good advocates, because that's one of the keys to making it work.
What is it about the jury system that you believe works?
I think if you have lawyers on each side that do a good job for their clients, and that you get all of the facts and the main arguments to a group of citizens, that you have a judge that can preside over it and give instructions to the jury on how they're supposed to consider what the rules of the road are, so to speak, that with the experience of 12 people, that you can come out with the fair result. And that's been my experience, and I believe it today.
What's the most interesting jury trial you've been involved in your career?
Well, I think I've been involved in a lot of interesting cases, particularly a lot of medical cases. The longest case I was involved in was the Memphis tobacco cases, and I represented one of the tobacco companies. That case went on for about 4 months, and there were five cases combined into one. Tried before Judge DeArmey Bailey in Memphis, and we had a lot of influence from outside counsel for both the plaintiff and defendants. So we got to see a lot of issues heard. We had a special master appointed during part of that case, which was an interesting development. And so I thought that was one of the highlights. I was involved in a very interesting case involving, basically it was almost an antitrust case against doctors in Fayette County, involving an effort by another doctor who said that they were taking business away from him and not permitting him to properly practice. And we tried that case for several weeks in the United States District Court here in Memphis, and it was one of those cases where all kinds of issues surface, and you have all kinds of experiences during the course of the trial.
When you're in a multi-week trial like that, five weeks, 4 months, how do you maintain your practice?
Well, you maintain it by depending on other people in the law firm to support you, which is has been one of the real good things about our law firm, is that when somebody is in trial, then others in the law firm have been willing to come in and take over and make sure that the clients are still well served, and that so that nothing gets lost in the process. So you have to do what lawyers have to do, which is to make sure that you have good delegation, that you have somebody making sure that that your clients are, that their problems are solved, and that basically they're taken care of.
Now, your firm has recently merged. Let's take a short break here for a second. We had a brief technical issue, General, but I was about to ask you about your firm. When you came here in 1967, you were the fourth lawyer. Now, with a recent merger with the Lewis King firm, it's a statewide firm with 100 lawyers. Tell us how you view that and how you view the future.
The practice of law is interesting, particularly at the local level, and so you study the courts on the local line. You're representing clients from your own community, and we did that with our law firm as it grew from 4 lawyers to 35 lawyers. And as we continued to expand, we expanded what we did and the kinds of practice that we had. And we would take a lot of lawyers in, and we lost some lawyers along the way. There got to be a point where we felt like that we could do better from a marketing standpoint and from the standpoint of serving clients if we had the capability to reach out to other cities in Tennessee. We had tried that a couple of times before. We had been approached by national law firms asking us to consider some kind of a merger. We had turned most of those down without any discussion. We'd had some discussion with some. But then it looked like that expansion into the Nashville area and to Knoxville and maybe even into Upper East Tennessee or Chattanooga would be a good thing. And we explored a lot of opportunities, but the one that seemed to have the best promise was with the Lewis King firm that had started in Knoxville, had a very nice expansion into Nashville, and then we began to have conversation with that law firm, and it turned out their interest and our interest, what they emphasized, what we emphasized, our service to clients, our experience with lawyers, the dedication of lawyers, all seemed to fit together, and so we entered into a merger. Now the merger's in its 4th, 5th month, and we still have a lot to learn. We still have a long way to go, but it looks very promising at this point.
I want to return to something we talked about early in the interview. You said your father told you there was 2 things he did not want you to do. He did not want you to be a lawyer, and he did not want you to be a Democrat. And we've talked about you became a lawyer. Have you stayed active in politics over the years?
I have felt like that one of the responsibilities of a lawyer is to be active in politics, because that's where obviously the national and local and state policy is made. So yes, I have tried to stay active. I was very interested in, when I came back to Tennessee to go to law school, about what was going on, and so I tried to reacclimate myself to the activities of both the parties. But as it turned out, it seemed like that my interests were more along the lines of the Democratic Party. So that's where I ended up, and I started supporting some of the clients, beginning with Albert Gore Sr. And I had met him because I was active in a social club in Memphis, not a social club, but a service club in Memphis called the Phoenix Club, which supported the boys' clubs of Memphis. And I was a speaker, or the vice president for programs, and I got Albert Gore Sr. to come speak to our club. And he did a terrific job and talked about his work sponsoring the interstate highway system and other things. And so when it came time for him to run for office again, I felt like he was somebody that ought to be supported, that he was good for the country, and so I committed myself to go to work for him, and I did. Unfortunately, it was not a good year for Albert Gore Sr., and He ultimately turned the reins over to his son, but that's another story.
You've worked in a number of campaigns over the years.
I have. I've tried to, I've probably done most of my work on the national level. I've usually worked for or whoever the candidate is for Congress from the Memphis area, and have had a good relationship generally with the people who have served in that capacity in Memphis. But I've also been active in almost every presidential campaign since that time, but not to the extent of taking time off to go serve in Rhode Island or New Hampshire or Iowa, but rather just simply to support with whatever finances I could afford or time that I could give.
You intend to remain involved in the future in politics?
As long as I have that capability to either contribute to campaigns or with money or time or whatever.
What's coming back first, the Tennessee Democratic Party or Tennessee football?
Well, I think that it's been a struggle for both, but I think the state benefits by having having both parties that compete with each other. It seems that we, even on the national level, we do better when you have two parties that are able to advocate each for its own position, and so that they almost keep each other under control. When one party has dominance, like we've seen in Tennessee recently, it's sometimes some crazy legislation gets through.
I want to return to your service to our country in the Marines.
Okay.
You beginning in your active duty before you went to law school, continuing in the reserves, and you worked up to the rank of Major General of the United States Marine Corps. I tell people that if you go in your office, you see a flag with 2 stars on it, and that's mighty impressive. Tell us about that career and how you were able to pursue that career even when you were a very busy lawyer.
Okay. The Marine Corps has always meant a great deal to me since I joined at age 18, and it seems like it's been a big part of my life, and I've learned from it at every step of the way. One of the things I learned after I got off active duty the first time, and I went back to law school, and I went back into the reserve as a first lieutenant and then captain and then through the ranks, is the value of the citizen soldier. And I came to really appreciate the fact that this country was formed with citizen soldiers, not necessarily with just a standing army. As a matter of fact, when we started this country, we didn't have a standing army, and didn't for a long period of time. It was, but the United States has always relied on its reserve, on its National Guard, and those have been great influences in the way the country has prospered, in my judgment. And so as I continued to stay active with the Marine Corps Reserve, it was always with that attitude that if called up, I'm ready to go. My family, we've had huddles about it, and they understood that as long as I was active, there was always that possibility that I would be called up, and they were ready and I was ready. I've had discussions with my law partners, so they knew that if something occurred, then I was likely to be called up, then somebody would have to fill the gap. And fortunately, as I got older and higher in rank and got the opportunity to do more things in the Marine Corps, the law firm has been very supportive. My family has been very supportive, and whenever it's been time to take off to do something or to take on some job, they have been very supportive. One of the things in the law firm, I used when an opportunity would come up, I would go see Kim Johnson, who was also been in the Marine Corps, and I'd ask him, and he would encourage me to do it, and so I would take off time and go make it happen. So as more opportunities came about, then I stayed active in the reserve, and I went back on active duty probably another 10 times over the course of the time that I was in the Marine Corps, because when those opportunities came up and I was called, and I went off and did the job, and people in the law firm were able to pick up the slack and take care of it. So through the Marine Corps, I was able to command at every level, from the platoon to company to battalion, which was commanded a battalion headquartered in New Orleans. It had all of the Marines in the South area. Then I went back on active duty again to take over a regiment, which included all of the Marines in the northeast part of the country. And then I guess as a result of that kind of work, I got selected to be a general officer. But I was always mindful that it was family and law firm that were behind me, and also the judges that were very good about when something would come up, they were understanding, and I don't think any judge ever refused to grant a continuance or to so that I could make arrangements, and if I had a duty, they permitted me to go do it. And as a result, when I got selected for general officer, I sent all of the judges an invitation to come out to my ceremony.
That ceremony was when you became a general.
Yes.
In when?
That would have been 1989.
And where was that ceremony held?
We had it here at Millington.
At the Naval Air Station in Millington.
Yeah. At the time, the Marine Corps had several thousand people stationed at Millington. So it was a really good opportunity to be able to bring the local community into that aspect of it. Again, emphasizing the citizen soldier aspect of what the Marine Corps and what all of the services mean to the community, and the community means to the services.
You mentioned being called up several times over the years. I want to ask you about one particular occasion, and I believe this was it during Desert Storm? Or tell us about that.
Well, I was on active duty during Desert Storm. As it turned out, I had an injury, and I had to have an operation about that time. I had a running injury, and so I went back on active duty, but I was in a cast for part of the time, and but I still got the job done.
This was
during that period of time.
This was with the 2nd Amphibious Brigade. Am I got that?
Well, that was another time I got called up where I went on duty with it was called the 2nd Amphibious Marine Brigade, Marine Amphibious Brigade, 2nd MAB, and but then in Desert Storm I was called up. At that time I was assistant division commander of the 4th Marine Division, and I got called up for that exercise, for that operation as well, and actually ended up going I didn't go to Iraq, but I went on to several other countries.
What was the longest period of active duty you had after you started law practice?
I was gone a couple of times for about 5 months, and I think during Desert Storm I was gone probably 4 to 5 months during that period of time, and it was. Of course, I retired in '97, so I retired before we went back to war again in Iraq.
You retired as a major general.
I did.
So how many people in the United States Marine Reserves at your retirement had a higher office than you?
Well, at the time, in the Marine Corps, that was as high as I could go. Was
I knew the answer
Major
to that
General.
question, that nobody had a higher rank.
And I was, at the time I retired, I was a senior one in the reserve. There were 4 Major Generals in the reserve at the time. I was a senior one. And I had the opportunity to command the 4th Marine Division, which was 18,000 Marines and some Navy personnel in 36 states, about 2,000 active duty and about 16,000 reserve Marines. So that was a really great opportunity. I had spent 2 years doing that. And then following that, I went back on active duty again to go to Europe, where I was worked with the U.S. European Command, and I ran the command center there in right outside of Stuttgart, Germany, for several months.
You retired in 1997 from the Marines?
Retired in May of '97, and then got called back, and then ultimately retired again, and because I went back on another active duty stint, but I retired again at the end of '97.
I want to ask you about a particular ceremony which I was honored to attend, and that was your retirement ceremony. I don't know if this was the first time or the second time at the.
Oh, that was the first time.
All right. Tell us about where your retirement ceremony was held.
Well, we had it on the Chalmette battlefield in New Orleans, and the significance of that was that not only was the 4th Marine Division headquartered there, which is I commanded, but it was also the site that Andrew Jackson had come from Tennessee back in the War of 1812, and he was a Tennessee lawyer and judge, and brought with him a lot of Tennessee volunteers. So he was basically a reserve general, and came to Chalmette battlefield and won the Battle of New Orleans right there. And so on that battlefield, I had a good portion of the 4th Marine Division that came from various parts of the country, and guests, and General Butch Neal, who was a good friend, who had gained a lot of fame in Desert Storm, came to be the retiring officer, and General Neal did all of the ceremonies, and it was a good event.
You gave a speech that day.
I did.
And I haven't told you I was going to ask you about this, but I want to ask you about this because, as I say, I was honored to be there. You told a story at the end of your speech that day about your I believe you called it your best memory as a Marine, about something that took place in an anniversary on a battlefield. Do you remember that story?
I do.
Would you share that story with us?
I will. As the commanding general of the 4th Marine Division, I was asked as part of the 50th anniversary of a lot of the Pacific battles to go to the battlefields and participate as the honored guest, and I did that for 2 or 3 different battles. But one of the ones that I went to that I had such a vivid recollection was the Battle of Saipan, and it took place on the other end of the world from D-Day, Normandy, but it was on the Pacific side, almost as significant. Not quite as many lives lost, but almost. The Marines and Army invaded the island of Saipan. And so for that ceremony, there were a lot of Marine groups that came back. And I had the great honor to be with those in the 4th Marine Division that had come to Saipan. And it was in June, and it was hot, and Saipan is in the jungle, or at least part of where they were was in the jungle.
It is in what country? It's
in Saipan, in the Northern Marianas Islands. So we had a ceremony there that day, and there was a band there from the Marine Corps band came to participate in the ceremony, and I was there. I had met these Marines, and one particular Marine seemed to be the guy who was everybody recognized as being the leader of this group that had come back of veterans to again return to Saipan, to the place that they had such a tremendous battle. And one of and the corporal, as they called him, kind of led the group, and so I sat next to the corporal during the ceremony, and the corporal only had one leg, and that was how I was supposed to recognize him when he came. And obviously I saw him when he came in, and I talked to him briefly, and then we sat there for the ceremony. And as the Marine Corps band got to the point where they were going to play the Marine Corps hymn, they started playing the Marine Corps hymn, and he grabbed me by the arm and he says, "I got to stand up for this." There's a great tradition in the Marine Corps that all Marines stand when the Marine Corps hymn is being played. And the corporal grabbed me by the arm, and I reached down and pulled him up from his chair, and we stood there at attention as they played the Marine Corps hymn. It was a great moment for me. I'd probably one of the real recollections I have about Marine Corps service, and the real loyalty that develops among Marines.
So, do you miss the Marines?
I missed a lot of it. I guess there's some things you don't miss so much, but I thought being a part of particularly the General Officer Corps, and one of the people that had some opportunity to kind of set the standard and establish policy was very valuable, and I recognized it was a great opportunity for me, and I looked forward to it, and I missed it when I didn't have it anymore.
What's filling the void?
What's that?
What is filling the void?
Well, I came back to the law practice, and I thought that having, at the time, I was spending about, I think it was about 180 some odd days on active duty a year for about the last 7 or 8 years of my life at that point. And I thought when I came back to the law practice and I had those 180 days back, that it'd be a very leisurely practice. But the law fills up pretty quickly, and the business filled up. It seemed like within a week that those 180 days were completely consumed by my law practice and family and other obligations.
Do you have any leisure time at all these days, General?
From time to time.
Anything in particular you're reading?
I like to travel, and Nancy and I do a lot of traveling, and we've been to Italy a number of times. I've been to New Zealand. I've been to a lot of really interesting places. I've been very active, still active with the American Bar Association, and being active with the ABA. There have been a lot of very interesting trips I've taken with the American Bar. So that's been an interesting part of my life as well.
2 more questions.
Okay.
Your lapel pin. I'm just curious. What's your lapel pin?
That is something I've worn since my retirement, and it represents my 39 years in the Marine Corps, and I'm proud of it, and I wear it every day.
What's the future, General?
Well, Shep Tate is a great model for me. Shep Tate was very active in the United States Navy. He came back into the law practice. He's been very active in every kind of bar association, and so I think that's a good model. I don't have any plans for retirement as long as my health stays with me, and I enjoy doing what I'm doing, and I'm giving some contribution to the Bar Association and to the legal profession I'm going to stick with it.
Anything else you want to tell us today, General?
I've enjoyed the questions, and it's interesting how when you reflect on some of these events, how meaningful they become.
Thank you, General. I've thoroughly enjoyed being with you today.
Thank you very much.